So today's job is a 2012 Honda Accord. It has the 3.5i VTEC engine in it, and today we're doing a timing belt, water pump, spark plugs, and just a routine service. So I thought I'd illustrate some of the steps that I would take to do a timing belt and water pump assembly on this, and I'll pick up when we got the vehicle on the hoist and the right front wheel off to gain access to the bottom end of the engine. Okay, so I like to do a pre-scan of a vehicle before I do any significant work, and I would consider a timing belt water pump assembly to be fairly significant work, just to find out if there's any pre-existing conditions before we take this engine apart. I know the check engine light is not currently on, but that doesn't mean there isn't a code in there that might be curious about whether we have that code now or was there before the actual water pump job. So I'll pick up when this system scan is completed. It takes a few seconds. No engine codes, no tranny codes. So it's done a complete network scan of 17 controllers, and as you can see in the list here, it's a clean bill of health, no codes reported, and the readiness monitors have all completed, so nobody's disconnected the battery recently. So at least we know there's no pre-existing conditions with this vehicle before we take it apart. So remove the engine, or the brace behind the engine across the towers, the reinforcement strut, 3 nuts on each side, and the plastic cosmetic cover off the front. Now we're going to have to support this engine, so we're going to have to put a fixture across here to pick up the engine and hold it here, because we have to remove this front motor mount in here, this one down here, and obviously take the serpentine belt off. I'm looking at this trying to figure out what's the less messiest way to disconnect the power steering. I think I'm going to disconnect this hose here and cap it, and then put the power steering pump back in that back corner of the engine bay. So the overflow bottle just slips out of this little notch here and comes straight up, disconnected from the nipple on the radiator, and the power steering reservoir just slides straight up out of that little clip. Disconnect the lower hose and cap it, and I've disconnected the upper hose and capped it as well. So I'm using a serpentine belt release tool, and but you can use a 14 mil either box end wrench. This tool has lots of extra pull. So I got this support fixture across the shock towers and across to the front of the engine and connected into the lift eye there, and I've removed the 2 bolts that hold the motor mount to the engine block and then to the body of the vehicle, and we should be able to sneak this out of here. You do not need to remove this bolt. It wouldn't matter if you did, but you don't need to. Oh, I see I have leaking power steering fluid. So there are 2 bolts that hold the power steering up. There are 12mm heads. One's down here and one's up here, so you can get at those. And then there's a little bracket on the bolt with a 10mm head. Remove that and then push the power steering pump off to the side, out of the way. Don't need to take it off the vehicle. We just need access to these upper and lower timing covers. So raise it up, remove the right front wheel, and we're going to have to remove this plastic inner fender piece. There's a couple of push pins here that are needed to be removed to get this out. While we're here, we might as well have a look at the brakes, and they're getting low, but they still got about 4mm or so on the brake pad. Yeah, they're still good for a little while, at least on this side. So we're going to take this plastic shield off. So once you get that shield out of the way, you can access the belt tensioner pulley. Or belt tensioner assembly. There looks to be 1 bolt at the bottom plus the pivot bolt on that idler, and that belt tensioner will come out of the way. Now you need a holding fixture for this crankshaft. I believe I have one. Yeah, I should have one. So I have my homemade holding fixture in there, which is a great big 1.5 inch wrench with a big nut welded in it so that I can put a socket through. It's up against the stabilizer bar, so now I can put a tremendous amount of torque on it. Impact gun typically will not release it. Sometimes if you heat the bolt with a propane torch a little bit, it'll release the Loctite and the impact gun will release it, but I'm going to try with this significant power bar here. So here's a look at my homemade tool. Now there is a manufactured tool specifically for this, but this worked just fine. Now the harmonic balancer just slips off there. Once that pulley's out of the way, I'm hoping that I can get this serpentine belt tensioner out of the engine here. There's not a lot of room, and you make sure you put it back in with this bolt, because you can't get that bolt in there. It goes up against the frame. So now we can begin to remove all the timing cover bolts, little 10mm heads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I don't know, 10 or 12. Now you notice the timing pointer on here. We're going to make sure that we line this up to TDC as soon as we get the pulleys or the covers all off, make sure all the marks line up. So you can access 12 bolts in the lower timing covers down here. There's actually 7 in this lower cover, but you have to remove the upper cover bottom bolts to pull the cover out slightly and remove it from the vehicle. So now we're about to set the timing marks so that it's in time before we remove the belt tensioner and the belt. So here's the timing mark alignment on the crankshaft. There's a little arrow where the keyway is. So I've got that lined up, and then the 2 camshaft pulleys have notches on them and a pointer on the back of the timing cover once we get that off. So I've already lined up the crankshaft at the bottom. We'll have a look at that. So I don't know how well this is going to show up with this camera, but you can see the timing mark right there, that little point. And on the casting on the back of the timing cover, or I guess it'd be the engine crankcase cover, oil pump housing, there is a little arrow. I put a white paint dot on it. I'm going to put a white dot on this one too as well, but you can see it lines up with the keyway. So I've got that potentially lined up. That could mean that we're on TDC compression, but we could also be out 360 degrees. So now that you got the lower timing cover off, you can remove this engine support, 3 14mm bolts. You can see the cover goes over it, so you can't be taken off until now. And you can see that looks to be where the water pump is hiding behind this cover. So I'm going to try to get in here so you guys can see the timing marks on the front. I'll maybe go in like this, so you can see I put some white paint on that upper cam sprocket, and you can see the mark on the cover. But the back one is not lined up for some reason. If I look in here with a mirror, and it's very difficult to see, you don't see a timing mark. You see the mark on the cover there, but not on there. But there is one down at the bottom here. So I'm going to turn this engine 1 revolution, because I noticed there's another timing mark at the bottom, 180 degrees out. So I'm going to turn this 1 revolution and see if the timing marks will line up. So it turns out it was out 360 degrees on the crank, 180 on the cam. So I turned the engine 360 degrees clockwise. Now this timing mark is lined up, and that back timing mark is lined up as well. So this is where we're going to take the cam timing belt off and get ready to replace it. Doesn't look like it's in too bad a shape. It's got 130,000, I think, kilometers on it, but it's recommended time interval. So we're going to remove the hydraulic piston that tensions or automatically tensions the belt. You'll notice that it's extended all the way now, but we're not reusing this, so we don't have to reset it. We have a new one in the kit. And the idler as well has to be removed. Once those 2 items are removed, the belt simply comes off. In this case, the pulleys didn't turn, but I'm not breathing too heavily here, so we're going to make sure nothing changes. If you are intending to reuse the belt, you would want to mark it so that you put it on in the same rotation, but we're not doing that. Next, we're going to remove that water pump. So here is the water pump timing belt kit from Gates, and I took the belt already and I got it hanging over on the mirror of the vehicle so that it relaxes because it's coiled up in here. And we're going to take this water pump out of the packaging here to look at how many fasteners are on it so that we can see. And there's also an instruction booklet down below inside here as well. So here's the new water pump, and it has 8 fasteners on it. Mind you, these 3 are already been removed. That's the front engine support. And there's another idler that we have to remove from this back cover here before we can get access to the rest of the bolts. So there's the water pump removed. There is a dowel pin that lines it up, and there are 2 little seals up here that got to stay on the upper back cover. But the gasket surface has to be cleaned. Got to rinse down the antifreeze and put the water pump back on. The new one, of course. So we want to make sure that these 2 dowel pins, which are in the new water pump, came out of the old one, otherwise you're going to have difficulty installing it. And clean the gasket surface on the engine block. I put a little dielectric grease, silicone grease on this seal to hold it in place. And we're ready to reinstall it. So there's the water pump back on. Those little 6mm bolts have a torque of 12 Newton meters, which is just under 9 foot-pounds. And well, we'll find out what the torque is on the motor mount bolt after. Make sure the water pump turns free. I've rinsed all the excess coolant off the front of the engine. We're ready to put the belt back on. So there's the belt. Got temporarily installed, or at least initially installed. It's not tensioned yet. I found it easiest if you leave this pivot out of the way because you can get the belt timed. It appears to be timed right now. We need to put the tensioner in now and pull the pin. See, that pin is locating that spring-loaded hydraulic tensioner in the retracted position, so it needs to be installed now. So once you pull the pin on the tensioner, it self-adjusts the tension on the belt. Then you turn the engine 2 revolutions minimum, 2 to 4, and make sure the timing marks are again lined up. So you can see the timing mark on the front here. On the front sprocket is lined up. The back one is a bit of a challenge to see. So I'd actually marked the, I actually put in my own mark right here across from the bolt hole here just so I could see it. But if we look with the mirror, you can actually see that it's lined up. I don't know if that camera is going to pick that up or not. But the top mark is lined up at the back. Front camshaft is lined up. Pulley on the crank is lined up to the timing mark. So basically now it's just a reversal of the disassembly procedure. I'll mention the torques as we go. So there's the view from the bottom. Timing mark is lined up, as you can see. Don't forget to put this little slinger on, and it has to go on with the bevel facing out, otherwise it'll cut into the belt. And the bolt torque on the idler here was 33 foot-pounds, and the tensioner bolt was 33 foot-pounds, if I recall. Now we're going to put the lower cover on first, then the belt tensioner, the serpentine belt tensioner over here, and then the upper covers. So there's the lower cover installed, the upper cover's installed, all the bolts in for the timing covers. That little shield is, or that little slinger is in place. This serpentine belt tensioner must be installed with the harmonic balancer removed. There's no way you can get it in from the top. It has to be installed as an assembly. And this through bolt on the tensioner here won't come out past the end or past the body here, so it has to be installed as an assembly from the bottom here. So now we're ready to put the crankshaft pulley back on, and probably a new serpentine belt. So the torque on this bolt for the crankshaft sprocket here, pulley, is 47 foot-pounds plus 60 degrees. So I've actually marked it. 60 degrees would be 1 flat. So if I turn it, I've already torqued it to 47 foot-pounds. If I turn it another till this point, lines up with my mark in my tool, we should be good. So I've turned it 1 point, which is 60 degrees. And we should be good to put the serpentine belt back on before we put this lower cover on. It's a little easier to manipulate the belt around the lower pulley here. So I've reinstalled the serpentine belt, the new belt on it this time. I've left this bracket off this power steering hose because I have to remove these coils back here to change the spark plugs, as I mentioned earlier. So I think we can go ahead and put the front motor mount on now. It's much easier to put this belt on when the motor mount's not in your way. So there's the 6 spark plugs replaced. It's actually fairly easy to do. Remove the 3 coils, disconnect the wires, pull the coils out. Same thing at the back. Now I've got the brace reinstalled back here. Clips on the hose there. I guess that's the brake booster vacuum line. And we're basically ready to refill the cooling system, although I'm going to drain the oil and change the oil and filter here first. Well, there's the vehicle back up and running again. Refilled the cooling system with new antifreeze. And we're going to check some other fluid levels like the transmission oil and such, and brake fluid, because it's part of a service. But we're going to run it up to operating temperature and then do a crankshaft, camshaft variation, relearn, which I understand is required after the timing belt replacement. So here's the procedure for doing the timing belt right from the dealer or manufacturer. Go through all these screens here, and right at the very bottom of this, it's got all the torques here. It mentions one last final step, which we are about to do. Come on, right at the very bottom. Do the crank pattern clear, crank pattern learn procedure. So if we click on that hyperlink, it basically is going to tell us to use the Honda diagnostic system, and so we're going to see if we can do that with the snap-on scanner. So I'm going to go into engine controls. First of all, we'll check and see if there's any codes, permanent codes. No, the check engine light wasn't on, so that's a good sign. Let's see if it's under functional test. It could be under functional test or special functions. I know on some GM vehicles, if you don't do the crankshaft variation relearn, it might flag a misfire that doesn't exist. So here's going to be a list of the bidirectional tests that are available. Crank pattern learning, there it is there. Let's see what the conditions. With the vehicle parked, it's not applicable to the vehicle being serviced. Perform the crank pattern learn procedure in the service manual. Vehicle speed 0. Engine coolant temperature above 167, 75 Celsius, automatic transmission fluid above 113. Well, I'm not sure if we're at that temperature yet, but I've been running for about 10 minutes. It's an automatic transmission. Has already completed. Select crank pattern clear if you wish to relearn it again. Oh, okay. Guess I got to clear first. Get my helper here to turn the key off. Okay, so we have the key on, engine not running, and it should clear. Automatic. Erases the pattern stored. Continue. Yes. Start the engine. Now it says turn the key off. That was kind of different. Switch the key on. Wait 30 seconds. Look, there's a little clock counting down 30 seconds. Why 30 seconds? Holy smokes, that seems like a long time. We'll pick up when the 30 seconds is over. So it says the crank pattern has been cleared. Refer to the service manual. We'll do the crank pattern learn procedure. So let's do that now. Continue. Automatic. Snap the throttle to learn with the vehicle parked. Do you wish to continue? Start the engine. Do you press the accelerator until the engine goes into fuel cutoff? All the way? Yep. Turn the key off. Start the engine. Now it says to wait 30 seconds. Again, we'll pick up after 30 seconds has elapsed. So after 30 seconds, it says the crank pattern has completed. Continue. So that should be it. Let's just double check to see if there's any codes. There shouldn't be any. No. Temporary codes. No. Now, realistically, I don't know how critical that actual relearn is, but it's what is recommended, so that's what we've done. We'll call this one a wrap.